Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Tacco Movie Talks. I am brought to you here with Matthew, aka War Champ. Check out his letterbox down below. Matthew, it's been a couple weeks since we last spoke, and we have a recommendation from you, an Italian director by the name of Pier Paolo Pasolini. And I just want to ask you, how were you introduced to him, and what are some things you like about his style?
Yeah, so I was definitely introduced, like I think most people were, through the Salò movie, which is just
Mm.
known as, the people call it like the scariest or most horrific movie of all time. And so that was the first one I watched by him. But then after that, I started realizing his other movies were really good too. And they were extremely different, but they had the same themes. And I really just liked the way he just a lot of like the visual imagery, the cinematography, even though his movies are a lot about what's being said in the message. I just like the whole the combination of it all. Felt very extremely artsy and hard to kind of grasp, and I always enjoy like challenging movies like that.
Yeah, he definitely fits really well into that sphere of directors who also happen to be great writers. Like a little bit Tarkovsky esque, while I think being maybe even more abstract. I mean, do you kind of find any relevance to that comparison?
Yeah, I agree with that because I remember like all the Tarkovsky movies, they're artsy, but it's in a different way. It's all extremely well written, like you said. But I feel like he Tarkovsky leaves a lot more talking about like metaphysical type of like questions, and Pasolini asks a lot more about like religious type of things for the most part, as well as like communism basically, or
Mm-hmm.
capitalism. He's political. He has a lot to say about homosexuality and just like LGBT stuff in general. And then he also uh, he's a different like flavor of Tarkovsky, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and from looking at the movies in his filmography, I was really surprised by how highly lauded he was because, like you, and I've yet to see Solo, but I have heard plenty of it. I think it's his most infamous piece of work. And I think for, and it might be unfortunately so, it overshadows the actual true artistry and creative genius that Pier Paolo Pasolini has to offer with his other movies.
Yeah, it does, and even his death, which happened like I think after he had finished Solo. There's a whole movie that the director Abel Ferrara made called like Pasolini, and it's just about his murder. So there's a whole like he has a lot of interesting things just about him himself, but then there's a lot of it's all kind of intertwined with his movies and his novels that he wrote before he started making movies too.
Exactly, and he is clearly someone who's really influenced by the written medium. I think he has at least, well, one of the movies we're going to be covering is based off a older English English literary work. I know he has a movie about the Canterbury Tales, and also has a movie about Oedipus Rex. So there's no surprise. I feel like that is something that tons of directors recommend. They recommend to read a lot, and I think it is also a huge inspiration for a lot of directors, and that includes Pasolini.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Yeah, and he Arabian Nights too is another one. He takes the old like classic like stories and totally makes them like his own in a very kind of I guess you could just say Pasolini way.
Yeah, and what else that is like kind of surprising is I believe he is what's the word? Well, he's non-religious and or like doesn't really believe in Christ or Islam, what have you. But it seems to be a big inspiration for at least a few of his works, including Decameron.
Yeah, I think of like Bergman and also Carl Dreyer, who we were talking about earlier. They also were like I think basically former church goers in their youth, and but almost all their movies seem to have some kind of relation to like religion or being about religion. And Pasolini's kind of like that in the same way, but specifically for Catholicism and Italian Catholicism, which is like its own kind of world with the Vatican and all that.
And I would feel like it would very much impact the culture in which surrounded him at the time, and of course what he grew up in. And I don't know this for absolute certain, but I feel fairly confident in saying that Italy in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was probably a very religious country at that time. And I think even today, it would be one of the more, religious areas.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of like Catholicism, I really don't know for sure, but it's definitely an area where it's extremely common. I visited Italy before, and their churches are like crazy. They're all hundreds of years old, um, and it's a lot like what it looks kind of looks like in the Decameron actually. Um, so, but yeah, and the religion, especially in Rome and the Catholic Church, it's a big deal there, and I think it's a big deal to him, even though he was an atheist, like you said, and he was homosexual, and they didn't approve of that at all, and they actually hated his movies and banned them.
I mean, that's kind of another similarity between Tarkovsky and Pasolini, which it's often like, an artist isn't truly appreciated in their time or in their area. It more often than not is a sign that you're tapping into something or touching upon a nerve that needs to be exposed, for lack of a better term. And looking back at these two movies, this was my introduction to Pasolini, and they are very, very interpretive, but ultra creative, and it shows true genius behind the films, I think. So, great recommendation with Pasolini, and he's a great director to view because he's so different and so unique.
Yeah, yeah. Especially on the rewatch, I realized for both of these, I realized how difficult it was to interpret his stuff, and then, but if you've seen enough of his movies, you can kind of start to realize more what he's saying because there's a lot of common themes.
Exactly. So let's start off with the first movie that we watched, and that was Theorem, 1968. This was really challenging for me. It was the first movie that I saw, and the beginning, it kind of starts out. I believe it like the very beginning takes place after the story that we see unfold. But the premise is that there is this young man who's kind of introduced to this family. He has these interactions with the whole family and kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of unlocks this other aspect to them. And then we see how these major changes occur with each character after this central character leaves their lives. And there's a lot of class criticisms and critiques going on here, I think, at least. Just kind of going based off of that interview that takes place at the top of the film. And what do you think Pasolini, his critique of the bourgeoisie, was in this film?
Yeah, that's hard to say. I can. It's interesting because when I was reading, I had the criterion for this, and when I was reading the essay supplement, Pasolini like strictly said this is not a movie about all these things that everyone was saying it was about.
Mm-hmm.
But that just goes to show like he probably didn't know exactly what he was saying. But from what I got from it was kind of like I guess to make it more relatable to today's world. So say that like he's kind of saying that the super upper class bourgeoisie people don't have a lot of like interests, and they're kind of you know when something like I think the visitor represents a sort of like divine holy figure or some kind of moment,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe in this case it represents the most joy or like greatest thing that's ever happened to this every individual in this family. And then when that leaves them, it's like they're left with nothing else, or maybe no personality or authentic self left. And so they all go into these different um kind of like the daughter goes into a coma, the son starts to paint, the mom starts like picking up guys on the street. It's all it's I don't really know why he chose all those things,
Mm-hmm.
but I see it kind of like a degradation, or a these people kind of losing their sense of self. But I'd also like to know what you thought.
Yeah, like you, I don't know specifically why he chose kind of each outlet for each specific character. I think the father is the one that seems to make the most sense. And it probably does tie into their sense of self, and kind of what set them apart from the rest of people. And I think that that is kind of the crux of the critique in my mind, is that when you're not so much focused on surviving, like you're kind of upper crust, you don't have to so much worry, how am I going to feed my family, right? You
Yeah.
you develop your habits, your hobbies, your personality kind of based on like what separates me from other people who are in a similar situation from me. Like what is my personality characteristics. And the daughter kind of seems to lose that. I think the son kind of falls into like a false obsession of what should bring him to that. The mother kind of almost goes the exact opposite direction of the daughter because of what she's kind of where she is in life. And the father seems to completely abandon what he made his self image to be. And I guess the most important character besides the visitor was the maid, who kind of transcends all of this.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that the maid basically becomes like a saint or a like religious figure where she cures the kid's face.
Yeah. And then it was such a striking image, and like I feel like it was an iconic image, the one she was levitating above the building. Like that was so picturesque and just a great cinematic shot.
Yeah, that I love that part, and it reminds me of another movie that he did, the Gospel According to Matthew, and a lot that is just like the kind of the telling of the New Testament, like Matthew biblical story, and all the lines are like straight from the actual scripture, but then he has these like religious people doing what's like would just be a mythical type of thing, like Jesus walking on water. But then he shows it in like a extremely realistic depiction. It just like happens and then it moves on. Like there's no it doesn't dwell on it like this like a magical type event, and that's kind of what that was too. Like she's floating and stuff, but there's not all these like crazy special effects and stuff to make it seem like a spectacle. It's just kind of like looks kind of like a painting basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of the shot goes there. And I thought that I think that's interesting, and that's something he seems to do a lot. Like a lot of his images look kind of like paintings if you were to just stop it there.
Yeah, and I know, not I don't know for certain, but there in my mind has to be a connection between the only person who's not bourgeoisie, you know, being a working class person, is the one who has this not even pseudo, a true religious experience, and kind of transcends the outcomes that the rest of the cast kind of their pitfalls, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. And another thing that I thought about, this whole concept of the family falling apart in this way is he has this other little movie, or I don't know if it's really a movie. It's called like Love Meetings, and he just interviews the different Italian population, like from all walks of life and all different areas. And he asks a lot about like family stuff, like is divorce right or wrong? Should it be allowed? And then like sexual questions too. But he seems very interested in the like family unit as like a I don't know, like a concept. And then like he seems to want to like make movies about the family unit concept, because I don't know. I'm assuming, and I think I might have read this, that he didn't really like his parents very much, and I imagine as a gay person in Italia or in Italy in like the 40s or whenever he grew up was probably pretty rough.
Yeah, and it seems like he uses that pain, that painful upbringing, as like a way to illustrate in these movies. So, I mean, you can definitely tell that there's a lot of raw emotion in his films. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I think of that usually almost every time that there's some sort of religious music that comes on or depiction in a church or of some religious ritual happening. I always think how how he how much he kind seems to like these things, even though he's an atheist. He's just very unorthodox. Like the things that he is, um, he doesn't follow kind of along the same lines as other people like that tend to believe, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's a gay person, but he seems to believe a lot of things and act in lots of ways that weren't common for gay people in that time, and it's the same for being a communist, and it's the same for his religious ideas. It's very contradictory.
It's almost like he comes at these great conversational points, or not kind of argument stances, but he tries to paint the picture of maybe what he actually believes, like, despite the fact that he would be rejected by the church at this time. It's like he's trying to illustrate a narrative in which they can coexist, where he,
Yeah,
a homosexual, could coexist in this religious landscape.
yeah, that's actually a really good point that I hadn't thought of, because the way he does tend to rewrite like the stories and the story and theorem, which I believe is actually based on a book, but I don't know anything about the book. But like though his interpretation is always like, let's put religion in there, but let's kind of make it in a way that's more realistic ish.
Mm-hmm.
Like what happens tends to be like, a lot of the times it's because someone wants a sexual favor or something, which seems to be probably a more practical explanation for why a lot of things might have happened in that story, and not some kind of like intangible type of uh, gods, or like the gods representing something. What they represented is kind of what he shows in the movies in a way, I guess.
I I think you're onto something in that it's very, he makes the story relevant to the time, to where people can actually relate to it.
Right, right, and he also tends to, you know, like especially in Sallow, obviously he puts stuff on screen that is like shocking. It has a lot of shock value, even in Trilogy of Life and in Theorem. The whole story in Theorem is very, weird
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just hard to grasp and explain. But it could also be, it's also like the Catholic Church that hated it. There's stuff in there that, well, like they would wonder, why is he mixing all this religious imagery with this story that centers around like sex, basically.
Yeah, and it's a very centralized storytelling narrative that Pasolini seems to insert. And this is just from what I know of Sallow, because I haven't seen it. What I've seen from Theorem and what I've seen from Decameron is that the sexual aspects seem to be a large aspect of his storytelling devices. And I wonder what he is trying to communicate with that.
Yeah, I that's like, I don't know. My thoughts on that are, one, he was he was gay, and that was, very, very uncommon in Italy back then compared to now. Of people, actually saying that they are and being open with it.
Mm-hmm.
Most people were hidden back then. So that's one thing. And another one is, he seems to, it's a kind of a weird thing to say, but he seems to like really want to show people's like nude bodies in like a
Mm-hmm.
non-pornographic way, because like every time, there was nudity, it's not like some kind of weird sexual exploitation. I mean, I guess you could see it that way, but it seems more like like the way it's shown in the movie is more passive. Even though they're having sex, like it's not like turning someone's body into a commodity, like close
Mm.
up zooms with like, like romantic music on, or like long sex scenes. Like it's much more like comical. At least in the Decameron, I'm kind of thinking of that when I say this. In Theorem, it's kind of artsy in a way, like strange, and weirdly shot the way, at least when the visitor is like having sex with the character, with all the different family members.
And it's like it's very free, and it's like a freeing aspect that kind of separates the visitor from the family. Is, I guess, the lack of, I don't even know, like, self criticism, the lack of, like, perverting it in the visitor's minds. Like, he's very open with his sexuality in comparison to the other characters, and in that way it seems to be the thing that transcends him above them. Does that track at
Yeah,
all?
yeah. And it's, I was just thinking about, how what each character again does afterwards, and like, there's even like a, if I remember right, I think there's a part at the very end where he's like doing the cruising or whatever they call it, where gay people would used to do certain signals to try and like get the attention of other people, and so they would know they were also gay. And then like the mom, like I said earlier, goes out and is like picking up men on the streets, but she doesn't seem as, she's still not satisfied like with the visitor. So it's kind of like, if you interpret it literally, it's like, as some of the, I think, reviews I like, just the funny reviews I read, is that people were just like, that was the most attractive person they'd ever seen or had sex with, and now they're like devastated because they know it will never happen again. But
Mm-hmm.
then there's all different ways to interpret the visitor as something else he represents, and then saying they lost that thing. Or in my mind, he's just kind of a representation of, like, say you like win the, I don't know, like you win the lottery, and there's that moment or day where you just feel incredible joy because your serotonin's just going crazy because you won something and you feel great. And then after that you kind of realize, maybe, that'll never happen to me again. On that, even though I have this money now, that feeling I can't really get back.
Yeah, and the way you described it at the beginning, I think really kind of suits my original thought of like what that feeling is, and it's like almost a religious experience, like being touched by the hand of God. You've reached such a high, but it's a high that is never attainable again. And putting yourself in those shoes, the actions of the characters, while they are like pretty wild, it does kind of make sense in my mind, because that's not really an experience that we can all relate to. It's almost like chasing the dragon, when it comes to like drug use, where the mom tries to chase that high, but other people have kind of, the father, the son do their own thing, and then the daughter is almost like realizes that there's no other, like, this will never happen again. So it was just really neat, that perspective, that kind of premise, and then how each character handles it.
Yeah, when you just said that, I started thinking, how it could be kind of like an addiction thing too, whether that's, to drugs or to, you know, I mean, like, anything else that could cause like it, or being famous and then losing that fame, stuff that causes a lot of feeling, like really, really incredible feeling, and then the loss of that, can lead to things like the daughter basically dying, or I guess maybe the son tries to, it's interesting, the art he does is like some abstract like type of impressionist art, and him peeing on it, I don't understand why that happened. But, but you're right in that it seems like they all kind of react in a way that a lot of people trying to get over an extreme addiction would react.
Yeah, and the son's reaction is definitely one that it struck a chord with me the most because I wanted to try to understand it, and a lot of his like self dialogue I tried to make sense of, and it seemed like he felt very exposed after the fact, and that other people would be able to realize that he's a fraud in his art. Like
Yeah,
he wanted to transcend as well, but I like he couldn't actually make that transcendence.
yeah, that's a good point, and I never thought of that. And Pasolini seems to have a thing with painting, even though I don't know if he painted. But like he in the Decameron, the painter is actually him, the actor. That's Pasolini. So he might just personally have an interest in that type of art.
I was really surprised whenever I saw that because I had no idea that that was him. I just kind of thought it was another actor. He didn't really stand out as like a bad actor whatsoever. He didn't have a lot of lines, but he definitely, he didn't stand out in a bad way in Decameron.
Yeah, he seems to. I mean, he seems to just be good at everything he does in the art type, where like a true artist first, and then kind of a filmmaker by choice. Like he was writing, really popular novels, and that he just. I heard that he just kind of just started filming, and he did a lot of the, held a lot of the cameras and all that stuff, and just kind of ended up working. I think he was just a really really smart guy, like all around.
Some people have all the luck, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. And he was a poet too, which kind of his movies kind of you could tell because they're poetic in a lot of ways. And a lot of the dialogue in this movie, even though there's very little, a lot of it seemed to be either kind of like religious sayings or like quotes from some literature or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it felt it had like a almost a it was very rhythmic, very like I guess poetic would be the best way. But you're right. There wasn't a lot of dialogue. Uh, on the letterbox, it said there was less than 1,000 words spoken in the whole movie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how they advertised it, I think, is that there's like 943 or something like that, like total words. And then when I was watching again, I realized it's mostly just a couple times when they speak most of the dialogue. The very beginning, when they're on the lawn chair, and then one or two more times. But then it's mostly a lot of it's like visually told. That's one of the things like I noted this rewatch is that a lot like silent movies, it's a lot of visual storytelling. You really don't get any explanation, which is a lot of why it's probably his most like the name Theorem. It's very theoretical and presented kind of like this, kind of similar to Godard, like a kind of you have to like deconstruct it and make the inferences about the meaning all on your own.
And the visitor, like the physical acting by him is the movie wouldn't be possible without that, obviously. So much lack of dialogue and just the physical storytelling through him, it it ties it all together.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder, how he tells the actors to. I don't know. It's just a very like you almost never see. I guess it's not newer, but like I'll say movies in color where they're almost not saying anything because like the script for this, he had to have funded this on his own, and you know what I mean, like taking this project upon himself, because if you looked at just the dialogue alone, it would probably just seem completely not nonsensical.
Yeah. I that would be a tough sell to actors and actresses, I'm sure. And I I feel like you would know, but I guess he was a writer previously. You would have to really trust the director to read that and go, yeah, I'm on board.
Right.
I enjoyed this movie a lot. As I said, when I finished it, I kind of felt like I don't even know what just happened, but
Yeah.
it it's a movie that really benefits from just like kind of like stewing over and just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's what I realized because when I started the rewatch, I was like, I don't really even remember much of this because I enjoyed it, but I didn't really know why the first time. And I just knew, there's and it's a good thing for a lot of the movies that are like this. They just make me want to rewatch them because I felt like I didn't follow along, and then when I rewatch, I realize it's because it was hard to follow along for sure. But watching it a second time kind of just reveals a little more because I have to, instead of having to unravel it as I watch it, I kind of already know what happens, and I can look more at the details, which are so important in these types of kind of hard to watch movies, like movies that I'd never just watch to be entertained.
I completely agree. When you can just like really focus on trying to figure out why these actions were taken, especially in these really kind of abstract and thoughtful movies, that's really when I think it begins to click. And I think that this is a movie, if I rewatch, it's definitely going to increase in rating. And I think it's going to age kind of like a fine wine, so to speak, because I tell you what, from when I like the second after I finished to now, it's just I've liked this movie more and more and feel like I'm able to actually piece it together more and more as well.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of movies out there like that. It's definitely something I enjoy, but you get why if you don't have a lot of time or if you just want to watch something entertaining. Probably, I don't know. Theorem's definitely not the choice for that.
So, Matt, any final thoughts and your rating for this film as well?
um, yeah, so I would rate this, or I rated this 4 out of 5 stars, and um, I guess my only last thoughts would be as I like I was saying, I even read more after the rewatch about this, and that all kind of helped me appreciate it even more. So, as I just said, definitely not just an entertaining movie, but I think you definitely got to watch it when you're awake, aware, and kind of like you would go into reading a difficult book. Just kind of have that same mindset.
Yeah. My initial rating was a 3.5 after I watched this. But again, like I said, this conversation, I mean, it's really made me appreciate it all the more. And I think it's one that I will be rewatching down the line. And I think it's a movie that is rewarding where you will get out of it just as much as what you put in. The
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
do you want to summarize this next movie? Because this Decameron is it's slightly, I guess, harder as far as a narrative goes to describe it because of how it kind of jumps around throughout.
Yeah, well, I think that since there's so many like little stories in it, I think it's kind of hard to just summarize all the stories because they're brief and they're all, they're based off the Decameron book that was made in like the 14th century. Um, and so I think the best way to describe it would be, like a set of Pasolini's interpretive, um, or the works of the Decameron interpreted by Pasolini that are just very much his way of retelling, in a more, I guess, it's kind of like if Pasolini were to, um, have initially written these stories, he would have had them the same, except he would have included all this other stuff, like a lot of nudity, um, a lot of like, it just seemed like you kind of said free earlier. That's kind of how it feels. Like you're watching something that seems like it not it shouldn't have been made, but people would not want it to, or people would not appreciate it very much, at least especially in the 60s.
Yeah, this is a movie that I feel, and I don't have as much to base it off of, but if Sallow had never been made, I think this could easily be one that kind of stands out as far as one of Pasolini's works. But
Yeah,
I think you would know better than I.
yeah, the whole like, so it's part of like what it's called, the trilogy of life. That's what people call it, and it's this one, Canterbury Tales, and Arabian Nights, and they're all similar in their themes of like a lot of nudity and a lot of sex, and it's like they even have like a warning of explicit content because I have the box set of the three ones. And but they're all very like lighthearted, optimistic-ish, like comedy kind of, even though
Hmm.
they're dark in a lot of ways. Like the stories are kind of like all the characters seem to be having a really good time. Like that's something I definitely noticed watching this again, was that at least they all seem to be smiling, and like the stories are kind of like funny, but in a bad kind of way, like the nuns taking
Hmm.
advantage of that, or what he made it seem like they were taking advantage of a mute guy who ended up not like it's a very weird way to tell probably what the original story was. I haven't read the book or anything, but it was probably a totally different story, and he probably just totally flipped that, and that just seems like something he likes doing. And I really like his depiction of like this biblical or medieval time period that, this is
Oh
based
yeah,
on.
I completely agree with you there. Like the set design, like the costumes, everything just felt really, really well done. And this, like the Technicolor from this film, was very striking. And I think Technicolor might have been used in Theorem as well, but like the colors just popped, and I just loved the way that the color was kind of inserted in this film. Did you notice that as well, Matthew?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I don't know if Theorem was Technicolor or not, but this definitely, it may have not had that opening because it was all in Italian, but it definitely looked like it was in Technicolor, which I always love. I seem to like it way more than other types of color film because it feels kind of like a painting or an art book in the way that it's so colorful compared to now. I mean, it looks more realistic
Mm-hmm.
current movies and stuff, and it does look good, but it feels more, I don't know, kind of like the colors pop way more, I guess is the best way to say it. Kind of like those old Andy Warhol paintings.
Exactly. I wonder if that is just not fiscally possible to do anymore. Because I would like to see movies that have that that visual to it.
Yeah, I looked that up like a few days ago when I watched that Gentlemen Prefer Blondes musical, because that was a Technicolor too, and it looked really good. And I Googled it, and basically from what I read, it looks like it's extremely expensive compared to just what they can do now. So they don't like it involves black and white film with all these different color strips or something complicated, and it just would take a lot of time and money compared to just being able to film how they do now. So I don't think they do it anymore. But I realize looking back, a lot of my favorite movies are in Technicolor partly because I think the visual aspect is so cool.
Yeah, and it's just being introduced to kind of this time period because I haven't seen too many films in the late 60s or 70s, but getting that exposure to it, I'm beginning to realize how much I like that style of color. And man, it really works in this film because this is like there's so many beautiful kind of picturesque scenes that really just are really breathtaking.
Yeah, it really looks like what I would think that time period looked like in terms of like, everything.
It feels like a vivid dream in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something I actually wrote down to remember, because that end, there's that dream scene towards the end that Pasolini play or the Pasolini plays that character as that dream. And then that's when I was thinking, this whole thing kind of has felt like dream-esque in the way that the story or the narrative flows to different stories, and just the way that it looks so much like I would have thought in Italian, like if you read a book about this time period and you picture it in your head, it kind of looks like that, like how I picture it. So it's very unique.
One thing I kind of want to ask you, because now that you bring that up, it kind of planted a seed in my mind, and there could be plot points that would point to oppose this view, but do you think that these are kind of the experiences that influenced the painter or Pasolini's character, and that's why they're kind of shown in it ends in this great painting that is like the illustration of all these influences that character has come across in his lifetime? Or do you think it's just trying to kind of set the narrative of what this time period is like and how all these religious themes were being kind of displayed in actuality as opposed to kind of what we think of during this time, and kind of putting a juxtaposition between, these great artists were kind of trying to praise the word of the gospel, yet the actions of the people during that time weren't quite as holy as we might expect. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, I think you're right in both of those interpretations in a way, because I don't know, the way I see it is, well, I just know this because when I visited Italy, like I was saying, I went to Rome, and then I also went to like Naples in that area around there, and the like I learned a lot about how they did paint back then, and it was a lot like he was doing it. It took a long time. They would paint the entire wall kind of like that, and like the Sistine Chapel and all those great paintings, they were like commissioned works, and a lot of the artists were like didn't really want to paint them, and a lot of them were like homosexual and stuff, kind of like a Pasolini type of character, and they would like draw stuff in the paintings that were hidden and things like that the church didn't know about. And so I don't know if it is, like you said, kind of juxtaposing like that time period and his Pasolini's edition in the movie of like these different interpretations. Um, I think I lean more towards that, but then I guess knowing that he's the director playing a character, I kind of also wonder, is he kind of trying to
My apologies for the pause there. But Matthew, you were bringing up a really good point that was making me think, and I want to kind of hear where you were going with the thought of Pasolini making himself the character of the painter.
Yeah, so um, I was saying before how uh, I think a lot of the painters back in the time where like similar to 13th or 14th century or later than that, when all the Sistine Chapel and important ancient paintings and works of art were being done, they were a lot of times commissioned by painters who would put their own beliefs in there that didn't really follow with the Catholic Church. And I thought maybe Pasolini kind of sees himself as that figure too, which is why he played the character that does the paintings, and the paintings could kind of represent, as you were saying, the stories that have been told in a way, kind of like he's this is like he's calling himself the artist. But I could also be wrong about that. It's very, abstract.
See, to me, that point really rings true, and quite honestly, I didn't really think of the importance of him being that character, and I think part of it is because I didn't find out until afterwards that he was in the film himself and that he played that character. But he seems like such a cerebral writer and director. Like, I can't see him doing that and there not kind of being an underlying point to it. And I think that might be what inspired you to think in that way as well, you know?
Yeah, I really think he sees himself, as an artist, um, and not as much of a revolutionary as like Godard would see himself as, and he made a lot of like more type of revolution type movies. But I think Pasolini, wants to wants what he thinks to be uh, like portrayed in the best way possible. And even though, and I think that's why his movies are so confusing, is because his beliefs are so confusing too.
Yeah, it it has like a religious aspect to it, and not just because it touches so much on religion, but he seems possessed to kind of get out these translations in the way that he sees them. And I think his background plays a really big role. But I mean, he seems like almost like we were saying earlier, like as though he was a fervently religious type person in the way that he is like very passionate about these religious texts and these stories.
Yeah, he's clearly passionate about them because he's made so many movies. But then you wonder, why, since he's said he was an atheist. And I think maybe, you know, even if, I guess, if you don't believe in the religion, you can still find, like he does, he found something special in it. And it's that sort of like, it seems to be that communal type of like rituals, church type rituals, and uh, like community based things they do. Like, he's always playing like church choir music in his, which is like very, I don't really know any other director that does that, like church songs, like Catholic type of singing as a soundtrack. And it's so he's clearly, super into it, but you wonder why is he so into it when he's not a Catholic. And I think he might just think that there's a better that it's special, but not in the way that people that call themselves Catholics think it's special. It's kind of like his own interpretation, maybe.
Yeah. Another point that you really brought up that I'm not sure I quite realized until you verbalized it. This is a very funny movie. I found myself laughing much more than I thought I would coming in.
Yeah, it's funny because like the situations are kind of like messed up, but they actors just are like funny about it and they just laugh. And like the situations are also like it's more funny like this time rewatching it than I was the first, because the first time I was just more like kind of like taken aback by what it was, because I don't know, I just hadn't really seen much like it. But yeah, very definitely really funny.
Some of the standout scenes to me were the first tale where the guy falls into literal fecal matter. It was just like a good, physical gag. And then there's another one where they kind of set up this character to be like a perpetual sinner. And they really talk up how much he has sinned. And then he confesses these false sins and becomes a saint in doing so. Like those two still stand out in my mind. And I thought they were like pretty funny for what they were doing. It almost seems like it has like a satirical spin to it in a way.
Yeah, I was about to say to me it just seems like he's making fun of like the beliefs of Italian people, like the religious beliefs, but also like sexual kinks and the beliefs of like along those lines too. That's like his main kind of focus of the movie, but it's also like what he makes funny, I think.
Yeah. And maybe this is, where his critique comes in that I mean we see this in America today. I think our culture is very much inspired by Christianity, and I feel like that could be said even more so in Italy. And one of the most taboo things you can do is talk about sex, show sex, and they're like, we're so shrouded from it. We like to keep it very, very personal. And Pasolini was probably, prosecuted in the eyes of the public because of this. And it's like he wants to kind of point a finger at this, where it's like, this holier than thou kind of facade is all very false, because these actions took place, they take place today, and just kind of pointing out the hypocrisy of Catholicism in a way.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think he's like saying, "Hey, look, everyone does this in secret anyways." But
Mm-hmm.
also, I wouldn't watch this movie around almost anyone I know, because like they would just be like, "Why is there so many naked guys in it?" And
Mm-hmm.
that happens a lot, but you're so not used to not seeing that in movie, but only seeing naked girls, and then so when you see it, you think like, whoa, I don't usually see stuff like this in a movie. And it's really ironic, because I was reading about the Decameron, and it actually inspired a bunch of like Italian softcore pornography films afterwards. And so then Pasolini like basically denounced it because he was so pissed. He's like, this is the opposite basically of what he wanted to happen, because he was like, did not want people to be taking that his idea and like using it to just show off like people's body and like porn and stuff. He was trying to, I think, get something else across.
Yeah, that I think I could see that. It's not quite trying to. I think you use the word that he doesn't really objectify the actors or actresses, and I think that is when it is taken to a pornographic nature. That's exactly what he was trying not to do.
Right, right. It seems more focused on trying or by showing certain things and making the camera like show sex a certain way so that it won't be used to like objectify people just for sexual like reasons. But yeah.
And I have to say, like, I believe I saw a review on Letterbox, and I think someone was kind of dropping in the text that inspired each short story, for lack of a better term. And I have to say, like, his ability to interpret each text and create these really engaging and entertaining narratives was superb, because like he drew so much out and to illustrate the text and like fully fleshed it out to kind of get the point across. It kind of felt like a Decalogue in a way, in his ability to do so, and he did it in a way shorter period of time. So it makes it all the more impressive.
I hadn't thought about that comparison, but I think you're on the money with that because Decalogue's just the different. Yeah, that's yeah, and he does. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I agree.
And he also does so, and I think Koslowski, he definitely puts his own spin on it, but I mean with Pasolini, his creative spin is just so unique to him. And like we were talking about, he inserts and injects a whole lot of things that are really important to him that he wants in the story into it, and like to create this whole movie that has a very similar feel throughout. And it kind of feels like the string that connects everything is fairly solid throughout, despite it being, 10 pretty different stories during the time period. And altogether, I thought this movie was absolutely genius.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's interesting that he has well, like the other theorem or yeah, Theorem is from like a different kind of era, people would call it. A lot of directors have like different, like this trilogy is kind of its own era that came after the one before that I think was a little more abstract and theoretical. And this one trilogy is obviously a bunch of interpretations of stories, but they all, like, even in the other like movies in the trilogy, that's why they call it the trilogy of life. I think it's because it's mostly like that sexual kind of, but also like making comments on like capitalism and in weird ways and consumerism too. Um, or it can be interpreted that way. But I know that Pasolini himself was like trying to make comments on that stuff through his writing and whatnot. But then Solo is, I think, it's very similar to the trilogy of life, but it's like a very dark version of that. So I don't know. I guess saying similar is a wrong thing, but it's kind of like an inverted trilogy of life.
Yeah, I'm with you there. As far as Pasolini's work, I mean, where does this one kind of rank in your mind? Is this one of his best
Uh,
works?
for me, I think I love the trilogy of life. That and I like Saloford. It's hard to say you like that film a lot, but I mean, I don't know if I'd watch it again anytime soon. But I it was extremely, it was hard to watch, but I was also glad I did. But then I would say Trilogy of Life is probably my favorite three from him as well. Um, I would say I like this one more than like Theorem, for example. And then his older ones, which we didn't really talk about, if you've heard of like the Italian neo-realist movement,
Hmm.
or he like those movies are more like that. Like they're a lot about kind of the people from the slums of Rome and stuff, which is what Pasolini most he that's the people he mostly associated himself with. Were like people that lived on the streets and stuff.
I'm very surprised to hear that he was part of the neo-realist movement, just because of like how abstract and distinct these two movies are. And I was tangentially aware of that movement, but I would definitely like to see his kind of outings, it as, you know, his neo-realist movies, because like in your mind, I'm imagining they greatly differ from these two.
Yeah. Like Akatoni, I think it's called. It's kind of about this like pimp in the in like basically the, I don't remember if it's Rome, somewhere in it's some Italian city, like the actual city part of it. And then Mama Roma is kind of similar to that too in a way. It's about like a prostitute in an Italian village. Um, so it's kind of just about like, you know, those movies about uh, people that normally they wouldn't have movies about made about them, like a prostitute or someone on the street. And it's they're like the early '60s, so it's around the same time as the French New Wave was happening. So it's a little after the first Italian neorealist films, which were like in the '50s, I think, if I remember right. But it's still considered a part of kind of that movement.
Well, I mean, it sounds like from what we've gone over, Pasolini was always someone who was kind of pushing the the lines of what was acceptable, and always kind of going against the grain. And I guess that is really kind of the spirit of the French New Wave movement as well. And you know, the last person we went over was Godard, and they seem very similar in my mind. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I was actually like comparing them in my head before this. I was like, you know, they're both clearly like communists and super supportive of that movement, but they're both, I would say Godard's more like revolutionary and he has more of an idea of what he wants to do. And I'd say Pasolini's more like theoretical and kind of confused and not, he wouldn't really want a revolution like like a like Godard would say he wanted one, like some kind of communist revolution. But Pasolini would be more like less sure what to do when it comes to some kind of practical thing in terms of his beliefs, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
He just kind of thinks stuff sounds good maybe, and he seems more abstract and less, well, like Godard feels more like he his movies take you out more, and Pasolini, even though he's so abstract, it still kind of feels like a movie, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah. No, I definitely know what you mean. And if I kind of step out of line, let me know as far as like the the kind of pathways that, or I guess the motivations, and why you like Godard seems more pushing for action and Pasolini seems more passive. And this kind of relates to Sallow. He knows the devastation that like an authoritarian reign can lead to. And I think revolution can often lead to a vacuum, a power vacuum, where that authoritarian reign can take hold. Whereas I think Godard's, his culture and his life, his upbringing, and the country as a whole, having not experienced that, I think he has more of a optimistic view of what could happen as opposed to kind of a realist view by Pasolini, and it almost leads to like an opposite perspective from what you would expect, like and how hard stance Godard is compared to Pasolini. But at least in my mind, like on a quick kind of review of that, I do feel like that is why, one is very hard stance, whereas Pasolini is like almost kind of throwing out these thoughts while not super focused on the action that he wants to take place.
Yeah, I think you're right on that because yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, Pasolini grew up during World War II in Italy, which was not, which was part of, allies with Germany and Japan and them. They were not, like France, who did get invaded, but they still had, and I'm not, Godard probably did grow up during then too, if I remember right. He was probably pretty young though. I think Pasolini may have been older, but it just seemed like Pasolini would have more experience with like what you were saying, that kind of authoritative government, and he would be just like he showed in Solo, that he was literally talking about the government, from World War II, his own government. So I think that experience definitely shaped the way he held his beliefs.
So, any closing thoughts on the Decameron, and what would you rate this as well?
Yeah, so I would rate this 4.5 out of 5. This is like this Pasolini movie is probably my favorite one. Except maybe, I don't know, I switch between all the different trilogies of life. I like all of them kind of the same. But I would say that, if you like Italian neorealist movies more, maybe start with his older one. But if you don't and you still are interested in him, I would start with the Decameron, um, or maybe Arabian Nights too. One of the two or the three from the trilogy. They're probably all good ways to start and try and first interpret what Pasolini is trying to tell you in his movies.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I'm very interested in watching Canterbury Tales, which that is originally a Shakespearean text. Am I right on that?
Uh, I think so. I mean, I think I read it when I was younger.
And I have to say, growing up, like in high school and even in college, Shakespearean texts were always my least favorite just because of the dialogue. But I feel like Pasolini would put such a spin on it that I am very interested in watching that.
Oh, I don't think it was written by Shakespeare from what I just looked it up to fact check, but it was, written in those times in the in the Kingdom of England. So it would have that same writing style as Shakespeare.
I still at some point I want to do, watch that. And Arabian Nights, I know very very little about that, but I've heard that movie, and I'm assuming there's been multiple famous like screen portrayals of that. Am I right on that?
Uh, I actually don't know. I just knew it was a book because I was at a bookstore and I saw it and I was like, oh, that's like the movie. and it was a giant collection of just stories, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing they're kind of all similar, and like they're just a collection of different stories, and they're all probably written in like the 14th century or whatever. But I'm not sure about the screen adaptations except for Pasolini's. But I'm almost. Oh no, there's another Canterbury Tales. I think David Lean did it. I could be wrong about that though.
I'm not super familiar with that director. Have you
Yeah,
seen that other?
Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah, I saw the older or the Canterbury Tales from him, I think, but it was long ago, so it was like a long time ago. I don't really remember it that well.
Okay. And this is what you're referring to, and this is what I was thinking of. You're talking about Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, that
Okay,
director.
David
Yeah,
Lean. Yes. Okay, that's the one that I got mixed up with, and I don't. That's not what Arabian Nights is. I don't think. Right.
no, that was. I think he did Canterbury Tales. He did a Canterbury Tales movie, so I'm
Oh no
guessing
shit.
they've all been adapted probably a few times.
Okay. Well, my rating for this one, I gave this one 4 out of 5. I thought it was really, really great. And again, it's something that I think benefits from conversation. It's like, it's awesome to get to talk this movie over with you because there's a lot of different thought paths that you can take with these movies and kind of getting to flesh them out through discussion. And that's really the only or the best way that I can really flesh out any ideas I get. And it's like, I find from fleshing out those thoughts, my appreciation always grows from it. So, I really liked this discussion and getting to talk about these films.
Yeah, it was fun. It's a good time. I always enjoy it.
So, Matthew, we are on to a very interesting section for this week. This is week 25 of the channel, which is kind of crazy to think that it's been going on for close to half a year now. And you've been a part of this channel for a pretty good clip at this point. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for being a long-term guest. Thank you for coming on to speak about these movies and giving your perspective. And I just want you to know I really appreciate you coming on and giving your like well thought out interpretations and just getting to discuss these about you because it's been a pleasure of mine, and I think the audience enjoys it, and I know I certainly enjoy it as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I really it's fun to have a place to be able to talk about movies. Um, I don't, you know, I have other friends that like them like me, but I don't know. I don't get to have super long discussions a lot, so it's always good whenever I can.
And I encourage anyone listening, follow Matthew on Letterbox because you're always watching different movies, and I feel like if you're a big fan of cinema and if you're watching or listening up to this point, I feel like you definitely are. I think it's a great follow on Letterbox just because of the breadth and how broad your tastes are, and I feel like if you're looking for someone to talk movies about, Matthew is absolutely a great resource for that.
Thank you.
So this is the top 10 directors. Matt, would you like to go first or would you like to go second as far as your top 10?
Um, I mean, I can. I'll go first on this, and then I'll go second on the next one.
Okay.
All right. So my number one is Harmony Korine, and that's because he was like the first director that I started watching more movies from specifically, and I really liked. He was kind of just what got me into watching more stuff that wasn't just like movies at the regular theater, and so
Hmm.
that's kind of why I list him as one. Um, and I think his movies are just funny and also interesting and enjoyable. And then two, Terrence Malick, because I love most of his movies and I always like his themes. And then three, Jack, or however you say that in French, the Jack Rivette is. I really enjoy his movies too. Super, they're like tough to watch, and I really like how kind of challenging they are. That's the best way to say it. And then four, I have Andrei Tarkovsky. Um, just for obvious reasons, he's one of my favorites. He's one of the first people that I started watching a lot from that I would say was more artsy. And then five, John Cassavetes. I really like pretty much all his movies, and he's like one of the styles that he kind of invented for movies. I pretty much like the most. Um, Six would be Federico Fellini. He just has a ton of movies I love, and there's almost not a movie I don't like from him. And he also just has a lot of movies too. Seven, Eric Romer. I think he's probably my favorite kind of romance movie usually styled. Um, and also his cinematography in his movies are always super good. It's always like really, really well done. Eight, I put Richard Linklater. He's from the same state as me, and a lot of his movies are pretty relatable, kind of for me, just
Oh
kind
yeah.
of because his upbringing and a lot of the stuff he says. And then nine, I'm putting Fassbender or Rainwater Fassbender. I really he makes really good films. I think I love his. Uh, they're a lot of them are melodramas, but they are always really good character stories, in my opinion. And then 10, I have Pasolini, who we just talked about today. And then I also put Kenneth Anger, but he only makes short movies. But he's definitely one of my favorite filmmakers. And then I have a couple honorable mentions. I'll just say their names, and it's just Bergman, Godard, Dreyer, Howard Hawks, and Gaspar Noé. So those are kind of all my favorites.
I mean, that's you'd be hard pressed to come up with a better list for sure. And a lot of the discussions I've had with you, a lot of discussions that I've had with Ethan, have made me realize like just how much I want to expand my movies, and I just came up with like a priority watch list with a lot of these directors that I just have very little to no exposure of that I really want to check out, especially like the older directors, like people like John Ford, but even like Alfred Hitchcock,
Oh yeah,
Fellini, like you mentioned, I want to watch. There's so many, and you've been a huge proponent of Fellini and getting to watch him.
oh yeah, definitely. You've got to watch. Like I personally just love his movies, but they're also all similar. So if you like, I would say watch La Strada. That's the first one I watched, and I loved it, and I just kept watching.
And then even like Orson Welles is someone I want to check out more of. And then like even some of the ones that I've, seen, but I just haven't seen a whole lot of, like people who are even on my list, like Scorsese. But yeah, I definitely, this list is kind of limited in scope just because I haven't had a ton of experience. I'm very much looking forward to getting to discover those films, but you brought up like a bunch of names. Like I really haven't seen. I've seen very limited or none of their films. You know,
I
and
mean, yeah, it's it like I didn't like any of these directors as much as I do until the past couple of years when I just started watching way more. Like like 5 years ago, like almost none of these people would be on this list. So it's just something that I've, you know, over time, if you just watch more slowly, you'll probably you may not change your mind though, because a lot of my favorite movies are different than the directors because they're a little more like nostalgic, I guess.
there is a great point to be made, though. I think based on what you said and how your top directors have changed. And I think that there is so much to be discovered in cinema that we often kind of get caught up in the movies now, and a lot of people will kind of get their viewpoint tainted and have like a negative outlook on how cinema is, and often forget that there are just so many classic movies that are at our disposal for us to watch that it's worth kind of dipping your toes into those waters to see if anything takes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, because I used to only watch new movies, and then when I stopped doing that, I just discovered a lot more.
So I'm going to go through my top 10. Matthew, feel free to stop me on any of these if you have kind of a word that you want to, or any, I guess, opinions or takes that you have, or things that you like about those directors as well. But starting from the top, I have Akira Kurosawa, and I feel like I've seen a good amount of his movies, and I didn't quite realize how much I like samurai films until I started watching like classic Kurosawa samurai films. And for that reason, and how much I love those movies, he's at the top. And I kind of tried to do this. I come from kind of a numbers ish background. So I did the averages for these films. Sometimes it wasn't just based on the average, especially if there wasn't like a ton of films to build up that average. But Kurosawa was 4.64, so he just barely eked out my number two, and that is Quentin Tarantino. Again, Kill Bill Volume 1, Volume 2 were both 5-star movies for me. And I'm a huge, huge fan of Reservoir Dogs. And I mean, Pulp Fiction is also, one of my movies that I look at very nostalgically and really like. Number 3, I have Kubrick with a 4.57. I'm very close to seeing pretty much all of his like major releases. And so far, like none of them have been duds. And like some of his movies are in my, top favorite movies. 4, I have Scorsese. For the longest time, he was probably my favorite director. Directed my favorite film, which we'll get into in a little bit. And I just have a huge affinity for him and kind of the way he's able to write dialogue and, the longevity of his career. He's just pretty top notch for me. 5, I have Tarkovsky. He sits at a 4.5, and I've seen all 7 of his films now. And I think Stalker, while it's not the top rated movie of, Tarkovsky. It's one that I want to rewatch because I think that will kind of push his average up, because I think I underrated it when I first saw it. Next, I have Bergman. I think his psychological takes in all of his movies are tremendous, and like the real raw emotion that he pours into his movies are pretty much very unique to him, and it's rare that you see a movie that kind of matches it on that level. 7, this one it's a bit of an odd one for me, just because it all comes from Decalogue, the short films and each episode, but it's Kieslowski. And I think just because I like this series so much and there's so many pieces, it put him at 7 with a 4.42 average. 8, I have David Fincher. He was definitely one of my favorites prior to really trying to explore more stuff. Huge fan of 7, Fight Club, and I really like Zodiac. That was one of my favorite movies for a while. 9, Paul Thomas Anderson with a 4.25. And I didn't quite realize like how diverse his films are. I was introduced to him through There Will Be Blood, and I kind of thought everything would be a lot like that, but he does differentiate a lot in his movies. And 10, I have the Coen brothers with a 4.5, but I haven't seen enough of their films to push them above with that rating quite yet, but I do plan on watching more. And just an honorable mention, he was my favorite for a very long time, but his average rating isn't nearly as high as the top 10, and that's Christopher Nolan with a 4.14.
I like the list. I would say that almost everyone could have been in my top 2, like especially Stanley Kubrick, and even Christopher Nolan has a lot of good movies. Prestige and Memento. Oh. I really like Dunkirk. I like all the Batman ones. Like he has a lot. He has a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, and he I think was like he's very accessible too, but he does a lot of things that kind of auteurs do as well. So he's like a good mixture in that way.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, can you pause it real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta go to the bathroom really bad.
All right. And now we are moving on to the top 25 movies. And would you like to go first for this, Matthew, or do you want me to jump into it?
You can go first.
All right, cool. So I mentioned it earlier. It's Scorsese's best in my mind. I think it's completely untouchable as far as just what the perfect movie is in my mind. That's Goodfellas.
Yeah, that one's in mine too.
Number 2, The Dark Knight, and that has huge nostalgic value. I think I watched it like 3 times maybe in theaters, and just like Goodfellas is kind of a movie I can rewatch over and over again, and it doesn't grow old for me. Number 3 was a movie I thought, based on the runtime, I would not like nearly as much as I did, and that is Seven Samurai. And like I said, I love samurai movies, and that is so far the best one I've seen. But number 4, it kind of gives it a run for its money, and it comes close but doesn't quite take it, and that is Kill Bill Volume 1. Number 5 is 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I think we might have been just discussing it before we were recording. I'm not sure if we were actually recording, but some of the visuals in that movie are just on a completely another level. 6 is Full Metal Jacket. I think it's one of the best war movies ever made. And I just completely love the dialogue with that film, and it is great. 7 is the third Kubrick movie in a row, and that is A Clockwork Orange. Like, very subversive, super duper creative, and just great writing all around. Number 8 is High and Low, which is just kind of proof that Kurosawa can like basically bat 1,000, even when he's not sticking with his bread and butter and doing kind of a more modern piece, like a crime noir. He's still at the top. 9, Raging Bull, one of my favorite sports movies ever, and it's very dark and gritty, and it's about a sport that is very much like that, and a character who is super duper unlikable, but you just can't help but be engaged by the story. 10, The Departed. It's like the best attempt by Scorsese to recapture Goodfellas, and while it doesn't quite one-up it, it gets pretty damn close. 11, Persona. That was a mind bender, and it was one of the films that kind of started to reform the way I look at cinema. 12, Kill Bill Volume 2. Just a great continuation of Volume 1. 13 is a movie that, Matthew, I think we covered together, and that is Autumn Sonata. Just tremendous film. 14 is Naked by Mike Leigh. The main protagonist is just like so charismatic, and he makes that film as far as I'm concerned. 15, another longer one I didn't think I would like, but I think it is the magnum opus of Tarkovsky, and that is Andrei Rublev. It's just great in whatever, what it is able to accomplish. 16, Rashomon. The way the narratives kind of change throughout, and it uses plot devices that I don't think were very common during that time. It's kind of revolutionary in that way, so I love it for that, and it was super entertaining. 17 is Decalogue 5. The episode got the nod for me as opposed to a short film about killing, which is the movie adaptation, just because I watched the movie first, and I think the second viewing is what really made it a 5 for me, as well as kind of truncating it and editing it to be at a faster pace.
I did the same thing. That's actually funny.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and I more too on the second and the episode viewing.
So I'm sure you kind of agree with that sentiment, that like the way that it kind of makes it more dense, it very much benefits from that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
18, I have Akira. First of all, the animation style is some of my favorite, and the story is tremendous. 19, Solaris. That is a really good kind of, I guess, attempt to go toe for toe with 2001. And while I like 2001 more, Solaris comes pretty damn close to topping that. And it's in its own way a cinematic masterpiece. 20, Secrets and Lies. Great story and great acting. 21, Zodiac. I think I've said this a few times. I love true crime, and it's about one of the most interesting true crime stories, and it does so in a really, really engaging way. 22 Good Times or Good Time by the Safdie brothers. That was the movie that made me realize that Robert Pattinson was much more than just a Twilight star, and dude, that movie is killer for me. 23 Dog Day Afternoon, 24 Yojimba, and 25 There Will Be Blood.
Nice. Have you seen Ron, the Kurosawa movie?
I am I've had that on my short list for so long. I want to watch Kagamusha and Ron so bad.
Yeah, I saw. I got to see Ron in the theater, and it was so cool. That's why probably why I like it so much. But it was like a really cool epic. That's probably my favorite movie by him,
And
by Kurosawa.
I think that's a lot of people's favorite movies, and it's colorized where a lot of his movies are in black and white, and just from some of the stills I've seen from Letterbox, it looks like he plays with color in like it makes the movie look like very striking. Is that right?
Yeah, it looks it. It kind of just is in a league of its own in terms of the way it looks. Like, it's almost it just feels very like Mongolia green, kind of lush, like mountains. I don't really know where it was filmed, but it just reminds me of like, I guess if you were there was like a Chinese countryside or something that was just a bunch of mountains, and it's very cool.
I can't wait to watch that. Definitely, that is high on my watch list.
Do you want me to go now?
Yeah, Matthew, let's dive into your top 25 movies.
All right. So at one, kind of pairing with the director, from the number one director is the movie that I watched, called Gummo. The first movie I saw that got me into like different kinds of movies and helped me, I guess, expands my taste. That was a long time, probably about 10 years ago when I saw that for the first time, though. And then at number two, I have Stalker, which is the Tarkovsky movie, and that kind of did the same thing. And I watched that movie multiple times, just because I thought it was super cool. Um, and then number three, I have Out One, and it's like 14 hours total, but it's like broken up into like I think 8 episodes, and it's a Rivette movie, and it's very challenging. It's kind of like it's a very interesting. I see it more like an artsy kind of extremely long. It's very hard to explain. It's a lot of conspiracy type of stuff going on, and there's a lot going on in the movie, and I just love his style. Is the best way to put it. At number four is A Woman Under the Influence, and that's a John Cassavetes movie, and that's probably my favorite movie from him, and probably my favorite acting from any movie is in A Woman Under the Influence. Five, I have Before Sunrise, just because that's my favorite, probably romance movie. Uh, I really, really like that whole trilogy. Six is Passion of a Joan of Arc.
Oh,
So that was another movie that kind of moved me like Stalker did, in the sense that I thought it was just like a perfect movie. And even though it was silent, it was still one of my favorites. And seven is Contempt from Godard. I just love that movie, pretty much everything about it. Um, it's, I think, my favorite, I guess, story, if you want to say it, it's a plot. Godard's movie as a plot, that's probably my favorite one. Just, um, And then 8, A Clockwork Orange. Kind of, I guess, just same reason you said you liked it. I think a lot of it is a dark comedy, and I love when I laugh at a horrible movie. A movie that's also has a serious, uh, message and is messed up, but there's also like funny aspects to it. Um, and and then sorry, I'm on 9 is Solaris. Pretty much the same thing you said too. I just love sci-fis. And that's I'd say more messed up sci-fi kind of, or not messed up, but like more philosophical maybe. There's a lot more weird stuff that happens in terms of like the hallucinations and all that. But and then 10 Enter the Void, a lot because of the viewing experience I had with it was pretty crazy the first time. Um, 11 is Day of Wrath, and that's a Carl Dreyer movie about like a witch hunt, and I thought it was just a very powerful movie, and a very like scary movie. And then 12 is World on a Wire, and that's another sci-fi movie, but it's a Fassbender movie, and his like sci-fi take is super interesting. Um, and then 13 is Good Time, and I just really love the Safdie Bros style, or the Safdie Brothers style. I recently watched Daddy Longlegs too, and that was a really good one. Um,
I did
it
not
was kind of like,
anticipate us to both have that on our list, but I'm
oh,
very happy.
I think I've seen Good Time almost more than any other movie because like I watched it, I showed it to my friends, I've showed it to different friends, and so I've watched it each like maybe like 5 or 6 times in the last few years, and it was good every time.
Yeah, it's a movie that I love rewatching as well. It's like super engaging the whole way through and very fast paced.
Yeah, I agree. Probably like the most engaging movie, um, or most engaging style. Kind of like Uncut Gems was similar too. Um, and then where's I at? 14, I have the movie called If, and that's directed by Lindsay Anderson, and it's I would say it's a coming of age movie, but it's the Malcolm McDowell, the same guy from Clockwork Orange, is the main character, and I'd say a lot of the boarding school stuff just reminded me of a lot of like organizations I was in growing up, just like whether it's like school sports or like Boy Scouts and all that stuff, just like that kind of mentality. I thought it was an interesting movie. And then 15, I have Love in the Afternoon. That's an Eric Romer movie. That's also one of the best romance movies. I think it's really like unique, and it has an interesting message to it. And then 16, I have Wild Strawberries. That's definitely my favorite Bergman movie, and it's probably one of my favorites of all time. And it's just kind of about getting older. Um, it's a very, I don't know, it just resonated with me more than any of his other movies. Um, and then 17, I have Out of the Blue, and that's like a really um, hard to describe. It's kind of like a coming of age movie, but it's very messed up, and it's very like a punk kind of movie. I guess you could say like punk rock. And then 18 is Streetwise, and that's a movie, but it's about real people. It's about real kids. It's more like it's actually a documentary about these homeless kids in like the 80s, and it's super like raw and realistic and pretty crazy. And then 19, I have Goodfellas, and I think it's a really, really good movie in basically every way, and also super memorable. And it really changed. It inspired so many movies. People just don't realize it. and like I don't know, it was a revolutionary, I think, movie. It's for its that still we see effects from today. And 20, I have Knight of Cups, and that's probably my favorite. Well, I was gonna put The Thin Red Line. It's hard. It was hard to choose Terrence Malick movie, but I really loved this one, and I think it's a love or hate movie, and it's if it you can relate to it or if it says something to you or not. It's pretty abstract too, and it says something to me definitely. And then 21 is 8.5. That's a great Fellini movie. It was hard choosing one, but that would probably have to be my favorite. That's also one that just is superb in like every way. And then I think I'm at 22. Yeah, 22. Lovers on the Bridge. That's a Leo Carax, something like that movie. And it's kind of a romance, but it's like a messed up romance, I guess. I don't know. It's more about the characters, and the cinematography is my it's definitely like my top three cinematography movies for sure. Um, and then 23 is Alhazard Balthazar. I don't know if that's how you say it, but it's a Robert Bresson movie, or Bresson, and it's super. It's just really like touching and an emotional movie. Probably like the best ending, or my favorite ending of any movie. Um, and then 24. So these last two are more recent ones, and they're just here because a lot of these have sat with me over time, and these last two I've watched in like the past like 1 or 2 months. But 24 is Blue Collar, and that's a movie I saw. It's a Paul Schrader movie. I think it's like probably the best, most smartest script I've seen in a movie that I can remember. And the pacing is just perfect, and what the message of the movie is and the way it gets it across, like I haven't seen any movie do it better. I don't think. Um, it's just it to me. It's just like perfect in all those ways, every way. And then the last one, 25, is this movie I saw recently called Children of Paradise, and it's this French movie that was made during World War II, and it's like it it's one of my favorite. It's hard to characterize what genre it is because it has so much in it, but I guess it's primarily romance. But it's way more than it's like a super big character study type thing too. But just the spectacle of the movie, and it basically works in every single way. And I was totally blown away by that movie. Wasn't expecting to like it that much. But yeah, those are my 25.
That's a very diverse list. A lot of stuff that I I want to watch, and a lot of stuff I haven't even heard of yet that I now want to check out based on your ranking and what you said about it too.
Yeah, I would say check out Blue Collar.
So Matt, thank you for being on for week 25, man. I appreciate you coming on and getting to talk about these movies with you, man. And I hope that the fans they listen to your lists and your directors and check out those works and some of the works by the directors that you mentioned as well.
Of course, I'd always hope people would at least check out my recommendations. And thank you for having me, of course, as usual.
Yeah, man, much appreciated. And we have for the month of October, we have been discussing some horror movies, and it looks like we're going to get to cover a good bit of horror movies leading up to Halloween. And I'm really excited about that, Matt. How about you?
Yeah, I always like a good movie that can actually scare me, or a fun horror movie is it's a good time too.
Yeah, and we're going to be definitely checking out some really really older movies and probably working our way through up to some, you know, semi more recent movies, but a lot of like good kind of artistic and creative, unique horror movies, and a lot of them I haven't seen. Some you're familiar with, and hopefully we both get some exposure to some horror movies that we both haven't seen, and hopefully we like those as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Alrighty, well that is all from us. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like and subscribe, and also check out Matt's Letterbox War Champ on Letterbox to see what movies he's watching and see what he's rated and reviewed movies. Thanks again for joining us, and we will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.